Zexhai floated in the observation chamber, his 6 tentacles wrapped nervously around the control console. The massive viewing screen showed the human military base below, buzzing with activity like an insect hive. Ships landed and took off in perfect formation, while soldiers moved with purpose across the compound. "This is a mistake," Zexhai whispered to himself, his translator picking up the subtle vibrations. The Galactic Council had chosen him for this mission because of his expertise in xenobiology and warfare analysis. They wanted to understand why humans had become such effective soldiers in such a short time. When humans first joined the Galactic Federation 3 years ago, everyone had laughed. These pink hairless creatures seemed weak and fragile. They had no natural armor, no claws, no poison sacs. Most species in the galaxy possessed at least one deadly adaptation. Humans appeared to have nothing. That changed during the Krex invasion 6 months ago. The Krex were considered unstoppable. These massive insect-like creatures had conquered 12 systems before the Federation could mount any real defense. Their chitinous armor could deflect most energy weapons, and their acidic blood made close combat nearly impossible. The Federation Council had expected to lose at least 3 more systems before finding an effective strategy. Instead, the humans volunteered to handle the problem. Most council members had scoffed at the offer. What could these soft creatures do against the mighty Krex? Zexhai remembered watching the reports in disbelief. Human soldiers had not only stopped the Krex advance but completely destroyed their invasion force. The method had been so brutal and efficient that several council members had demanded an investigation into possible war crimes. Now Zexhai was here to observe human training exercises and combat preparations. The council wanted to know if humans posed a threat to galactic peace. Some members whispered that perhaps they had been too hasty in accepting humanity into the Federation. The observation ship was completely invisible to human sensors. Zexhai could watch and record everything without being detected. He had been studying their base for 3 days, and already he was disturbed by what he saw. Human soldiers trained for 18 hours a day. They pushed their bodies far beyond what should have been physically possible for their species. Zexhai watched them lift weights that would crush most Federation species, run distances that would kill a Thraxian, and practice combat moves that required impossible flexibility. What made it worse was that they seemed to enjoy it. Other species trained because they had to. Humans trained because they wanted to. They competed with each other constantly, always trying to be faster, stronger, better. Zexhai had never seen anything like it. The base commander was a human female named Sarah Chen. Zexhai had been observing her particularly closely because her psychological profile made no sense. According to Federation records, she was only 32 years old, which was barely adult by most species standards. Yet she commanded the respect of thousands of soldiers and had planned the strategy that destroyed the Krex. Chen was currently in the main training facility, working with a group of new recruits. Zexhai focused his sensors on the scene, recording everything for his report. "Listen up, recruits." Chen's voice carried clearly across the training ground. "Today we're practicing close-quarters combat. I know some of you think this is outdated. After all, we have energy weapons and guided missiles. Why would we need to fight with our hands?" The recruits stood at attention, hanging on every word. Zexhai noticed that their eyes never left Chen's face. The level of focus was intense, almost religious. "The answer is simple," Chen continued. "Technology fails. Weapons jam. Ammunition runs out. But your body, your mind, those are weapons that never stop working. And unlike every other species in this galaxy, we humans have spent our entire evolutionary history learning how to kill things bigger and stronger than ourselves." She gestured to a holographic display that showed various Federation species. "The Thraxians are 3 times our size and have natural armor. The Viridians can generate electrical discharges. The Kornak have acid for blood. Every species out there has some natural advantage over us." Zexhai found himself leaning forward, despite his growing unease. "But we have something they don't," Chen said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "We have the one advantage that matters most in combat. We have the willingness to do whatever it takes to win. We have the ability to look death in the face and smile." She pointed to one of the recruits, a young male who couldn't have been more than 20 years old. "Rodriguez, what's the first rule of human combat?" "There are no rules, ma'am," the recruit replied without hesitation. "Exactly. While other species worry about honor and tradition and fighting fair, we worry about going home alive. We cheat, we lie, we use dirty tricks. We turn their strengths against them. Chen's smile was sharp as a blade. And we never ever give up. Zexai felt a chill run through his body. He had studied thousands of species, but he had never heard military doctrine quite like this. Most civilized races had codes of honor, rules of engagement, principles that guided their warfare. Humans seemed to have discarded all of that. Now, Chen continued, let's practice what happens when a Krex warrior gets too close for your weapon to be effective. She called forward another recruit, this one easily twice her size. The male human moved confidently, clearly believing his size and strength would give him an advantage. Zexai calculated that the recruit outweighed Chen by at least 40 kilograms and had a significant reach advantage. What happened next would haunt Zexai's dreams for cycles to come. Chen moved like liquid lightning. One moment she was standing casually, the next she was behind the larger human, her arm wrapped around his throat. The recruit tried to grab her, but she shifted her weight and used his momentum against him. Within seconds, the much larger human was on the ground, gasping for air. The Krex have tough armor on their front, Chen explained calmly while maintaining her hold. But their breathing organs are protected only by soft tissue. Get behind them. Apply pressure here. And even the mightiest warrior becomes helpless in under 10 seconds. The recruit tapped frantically against her arm, and Chen released him immediately. He rolled away, coughing and rubbing his throat, but Zexai noticed something disturbing. The human was smiling. Despite being easily defeated, despite being embarrassed in front of his peers, the recruit looked pleased. Who wants to try that technique? Chen asked. Every single recruit raised their hand. Zexai realized with growing horror that these creatures didn't just learn to fight. They enjoyed it. They craved it. Violence wasn't a necessary evil for humans, it was entertainment. The mess hall was where Zexai made his first truly disturbing discovery about human psychology. He had been monitoring their food consumption, expecting to find evidence of chemical enhancement or genetic modification that might explain their combat effectiveness. Instead, he found something far more unsettling. Humans told stories while they ate. Not just any stories. War stories. Zexai focused his sensors on a table where several veterans sat with new recruits. An older human named Martinez was speaking, his weathered face animated as he gestured with his eating utensil. So there I was, completely surrounded by 6 Krex warriors, Martinez said, pausing to take a bite of what appeared to be processed protein. My rifle was empty, my backup weapon was jammed, and I had maybe 30 seconds before they broke through my cover. The recruits leaned forward, their food forgotten. Zexai noted their elevated heart rates and dilated pupils. They were experiencing what humans called excitement. What did you do? Asked a young female recruit. Martinez grinned, and Zexai felt that familiar chill. Human smiles during combat discussions never seemed to indicate happiness. They indicated something much more predatory. I remembered what Commander Chen taught us about improvised weapons. Martinez continued. Everything around you is a potential tool. The Krex had cornered me in a maintenance section, lots of pipes and machinery. So I grabbed a wrench, biggest one I could find, and decided to make them regret getting so close. Zexai checked his database on Krex physiology. The creatures stood nearly 3 meters tall and weighed over 400 kilograms. Their natural armor could deflect most small arms fire. The idea of a human attacking them with a simple tool should have been suicidal. The first one came around the corner expecting to find easy prey, Martinez said. Instead, it found a very angry human with a 2-meter pipe wrench. I swung for the joint where its head met its body, the only spot not covered by heavy armor. The recruit's eyes widened. Did it work? Let's just say that Krex won't be eating solid food for a very long time, Martinez replied. The impact rang like a bell. The other 5 heard their buddy screaming and decided to rush me all at once. Zexai was recording every word, but part of him wanted to stop listening. He was beginning to understand why the council was concerned about humanity. 5 against 1? That hardly seems fair, said another recruit. Martinez's grin widened. You're right. It wasn't fair at all. Those poor Krex didn't stand a chance. The casual way he reversed the expected meaning made Zexai's tentacles twitch nervously. In any rational analysis, 5 armored Krex warriors should easily overwhelm 1 human with an improvised weapon. But Martinez spoke as if the Krex were the ones at a disadvantage. I used the confined space against them, Martinez explained. Big creatures like the Krex expect to use their size as an advantage. But in tight quarters, being large becomes a liability. They couldn't maneuver properly, couldn't coordinate their attacks. I just had to be faster and more flexible. Another veteran at the table, a woman named Torres, laughed. Remember the look on Captain Harrison's face when he found you afterward? 6 unconscious Creks, 1 human with a bent wrench and not a scratch on you. Harrison still says I'm insane, Martinez replied. But insanity is just another weapon when you use it right. HFY paused his recording. He needed to process what he was hearing. These humans weren't just effective soldiers, they were genuinely disturbed. They treated impossible odds as entertainment. They used their apparent weaknesses as advantages. They seemed to enjoy violence in a way that defied all logic. The conversation continued, and HFY forced himself to keep listening. The best part, Martinez said, was what happened when their reinforcements arrived. 12 more Creks, all expecting to find their comrades standing over a dead human. Instead, they found their warriors tied up with maintenance cables and hanging from the ceiling. The recruits burst into laughter. HFY checked the audio levels 3 times to make sure his equipment was working correctly. These creatures were laughing about combat techniques that bordered on torture. You hung them from the ceiling? Asked a recruit. Creks are bottom-heavy, Torres explained. Their center of gravity makes them very stable on the ground, but completely helpless when suspended. Martinez figured that out and turned it into a psychological weapon. The reinforcements took one look at their hanging comrades and decided to call for backup rather than engage, Martinez added. By the time they worked up the courage to attack, human reinforcements had arrived. We captured the entire patrol without firing a shot. HFY realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Humans didn't just win battles through superior technology or numbers. They won through psychological warfare, creative problem-solving, and a complete disregard for conventional military doctrine. But what disturbed him most was how they shared these stories. Other species discussed combat as a necessary evil, something to be endured for the greater good. Humans discussed it like other species might discuss sports or entertainment. A new voice joined the conversation. Commander Chen had entered the mess hall and approached their table. The entire room fell silent as soldiers noticed her presence. Mind if I join you? Chen asked, though she was already pulling out a chair. Of course, ma'am, Martinez said. Just sharing some war stories with the new kids. Chen nodded approvingly. Good, they need to understand what they're getting into. She turned to the recruits. What did you learn from Martinez's story? The young female recruit spoke up first. That conventional tactics don't always work, ma'am. Sometimes you have to improvise. Good, Chen said. What else? That size and armor aren't everything, added another recruit. Intelligence and adaptability matter more. Excellent. And the most important lesson? The recruits looked uncertain. Chen waited patiently, letting them think. Finally, one of them spoke hesitantly. That humans don't fight fair? Chen's smile was sharp and approving. That humans fight to win. Fair is a luxury we can't afford when lives are on the line. Every other species in the galaxy has natural advantages. They rely on those advantages and follow predictable patterns. She gestured around the mess hall, where hundreds of human soldiers sat eating and talking. We have only one natural advantage, but it's the most important one. We adapt, we learn, we overcome. When conventional tactics fail, we invent new ones. When our weapons break, we make new weapons. When facing impossible odds, we find ways to make them possible. HFY felt a chill of recognition. Chen was describing exactly what made humans so dangerous. They didn't accept limitations. They treated every obstacle as a puzzle to be solved, every enemy strength as a weakness to be exploited. The other species fight the way their ancestors fought for thousands of years. Chen continued. Same tactics, same strategies, same thinking. But humans? We've been at war with our own planet since we learned to walk upright. We've fought ice ages, predators, diseases, natural disasters, and each other. We've learned that survival isn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about being the most adaptable. The mess hall had grown completely quiet. Even the veterans were listening intently, as if hearing this for the first time. Tomorrow we start live combat exercises, Chen announced. You'll be facing simulated enemies with real weapons and real stakes. Some of you might get hurt. Some of you might fail, but all of you will learn what it means to be human in combat. HFY realized that his mission was becoming more complicated by the hour. He wasn't just observing human military capabilities. He was witnessing the birth of something entirely new in galactic warfare. The live combat exercises began at dawn, and Zexhai positioned his observation ship for optimal recording. He had expected standard military training scenarios, controlled environments with safety protocols and predictable outcomes. What he witnessed instead defied every assumption he had about civilized warfare. Commander Chen stood before a group of 50 recruits in what appeared to be a massive warehouse complex. The space had been transformed into an urban combat zone, complete with buildings, vehicles, and obstacles that could have been lifted from any populated world. "Today you face the simulation of sorrow," Chen announced. "This exercise is based on real combat data from 12 different species. The artificial intelligence controlling your opponents has been programmed with actual tactical information from our enemies." Zexhai accessed the exercise parameters through his monitoring equipment. The simulation included hostile forces from 6 different alien species, each with their natural advantages and combat doctrines. The humans would be outnumbered 3-1 and face enemies equipped with superior technology. "Your objective is simple," Chen continued. "Survive for 6 hours while completing 3 mission goals. First, rescue civilian hostages from the central building. Second, destroy the enemy command post. Third, prevent enemy reinforcements from reaching the battle zone." One recruit raised his hand. "Ma'am, the tactical analysis shows we're facing impossible odds. The Cornac acid troops alone should be able to—" Chen cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Did I ask for a tactical analysis, recruit?" "No, ma'am. The enemy has superior numbers, better equipment, and home field advantage," Chen said. "In any reasonable assessment, you should all be dead within the first hour. But you're not facing this scenario as reasonable beings. You're facing it as humans," she gestured to the combat zone. "Your equipment consists of standard Federation small arms, basic medical supplies, and whatever you can scavenge from the environment. The enemy forces will use live ammunition with safety limiters. You'll feel pain but won't suffer permanent damage. However, if the simulation determines you've been killed, you're out of the exercise." Zexhai noted that several recruits looked genuinely nervous. This was encouraging. Perhaps humans did have normal survival instincts after all. "One more thing," Chen added. "The winning team gets a 3-day leave. The losing team gets to repeat this exercise every day until they succeed." The nervousness vanished immediately, replaced by something Zexhai recognized with growing dread. The humans were no longer afraid, they were excited. The exercise began with a coordinated assault by simulated Thraxian heavy infantry. These artificial opponents moved with perfect tactical precision, using energy shields and plasma weapons to establish a perimeter around the human position. Zexhai expected the humans to respond with conventional counter-assault tactics or defensive positioning. Instead, they did something completely unexpected. They scattered. Within minutes, the 50-person human unit had broken into 12 separate groups, each moving in different directions. Some groups engaged the enemy directly, while others seemed to disappear entirely. The Thraxian simulation, programmed for standard military responses, struggled to adapt to this chaotic approach. Lieutenant Rodriguez, the same recruit Zexhai had observed during Chen's demonstration, led a team of 4 humans in what appeared to be a suicide charge against a Thraxian strongpoint. The simulated aliens concentrated their fire on his group, certain they could eliminate the threat quickly. That's when Zexhai learned about human misdirection tactics. Rodriguez's suicide charge was actually a carefully coordinated deception. While the Thraxians focused on his team, 3 other human groups had circled around behind them. The aliens found themselves surrounded and under attack from directions they hadn't even considered. But what happened next was even more disturbing. Rather than simply defeating the Thraxian position, the humans studied their enemies' weapons and tactics in real time. Within minutes, they had figured out how to operate captured Thraxian equipment and were using it against its original owners. "Fascinating," Zexhai whispered to himself. "They learn from their enemies during active combat." The scenario became more complex as additional enemy forces joined the battle. Cornac acid troops emerged from underground positions, their caustic attacks forcing most combatants to maintain safe distances. The simulation expected this development to fragment the battlefield and create defensive stalemates. Instead, the humans adapted again. Sergeant Torres led a team that had discovered something interesting about Kornak physiology. Their acid attacks were devastating at close range but completely useless beyond 50 meters. Rather than avoiding them, Torres organized her team to engage them at precisely 51 meters. Close enough to hit them accurately, far enough to avoid their acid. More importantly, the humans quickly learned to use Kornak acid as a weapon. They captured acid samples in improvised containers and began using them to dissolve enemy equipment and fortifications. What was meant to be the aliens' greatest advantage became another tool in the human arsenal. HFY watched in horrified fascination as the exercise continued. Every time the simulation introduced a new challenge, the humans found a way to turn it to their advantage. When Viridian shock troops used electrical attacks to disable their equipment, the humans learned to ground themselves and redirect the electricity back at their attackers. When flying Nixari scouts used mobility and aerial superiority to coordinate enemy forces, the humans began constructing improvised anti-aircraft weapons from salvaged materials. They turned maintenance equipment into projectile launchers and used enemy ammunition as improvised explosives. But the most disturbing development came during the hostage rescue operation. The scenario called for the humans to infiltrate a heavily defended building and extract civilian hostages without causing casualties. Most species would approach this with careful planning, stealth tactics, and precision strikes to minimize risk. The humans chose a different approach entirely. They created a diversion by appearing to assault the building from the front while actually tunneling underneath it. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was how they dealt with the hostage takers once they reached the civilians. Rather than engaging in a firefight that might endanger the hostages, the humans used psychological warfare. They systematically eliminated the guards' communication equipment, power sources, and escape routes. Then they began making noise, terrifying, inhuman sounds that echoed through the building. HFY watched the simulation data as the artificial guards became increasingly panicked. These programs had been designed to simulate the psychology of actual alien soldiers, and they were responding exactly as their real counterparts would. The humans had turned themselves into monsters. They used their knowledge of alien psychology against their enemies, creating fear responses that overrode tactical training. The guards began making mistakes, abandoning positions, even fighting each other in their panic. Within 30 minutes, the humans had rescued all hostages without firing a single shot inside the building. The simulated guards had been so terrified by human psychological tactics that they had essentially defeated themselves. This is not military training, HFY realized with growing alarm. This is instruction in total warfare. The exercise continued for another 4 hours, but HFY had seen enough. The humans didn't just defeat their opponents, they broke them. They used every advantage, exploited every weakness, and turned their enemies' strengths into vulnerabilities. More disturbing still was their efficiency. By the end of the exercise, they had not only completed all 3 objectives, but had captured enough enemy equipment to outfit themselves better than when they started. They had turned a desperate survival scenario into a resource acquisition opportunity. When Commander Chen called an end to the exercise, all 50 recruits were still alive and active. They had faced impossible odds against 6 different alien species and emerged victorious with minimal casualties. Acceptable performance, Chen announced to the assembled recruits. You completed the mission objectives and demonstrated basic competency in adaptive tactics. HFY checked his translation software. Surely Chen had said exceptional performance or outstanding achievement. But no, she had called this incredible display merely acceptable. Tomorrow we'll run the same scenario, Chen continued, but this time the enemy forces will be programmed with countermeasures based on your tactics today. They'll know what you're going to do before you do it. The recruits didn't look discouraged. If anything, they looked more excited than before. Ma'am, asked one recruit, will we be allowed to use the tactics we observed from the enemy forces today? Chen smiled that predatory smile HFY was learning to dread. You're learning to think like a human, recruit. Yes, you're encouraged to use any tactic that proves effective regardless of its origin. HFY realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Humans didn't just fight wars, they studied them. They learned from every enemy, adapted to every situation, and constantly evolved their methods. They were becoming more dangerous with every battle. 3 days into his observation mission, Zexhai made contact with something he hadn't expected to find, a human who questioned their own methods. Dr. Elena Vasquez worked in the base's medical facility, treating injuries from training exercises and maintaining the soldiers' physical conditioning. Unlike the warriors Zexhai had been observing, she seemed to possess something resembling normal ethical boundaries. Zexhai had been monitoring her conversations with patients, hoping to understand how humans dealt with the psychological effects of their extreme combat training. What he discovered was even more revealing than the training itself. Another group of recruits came in today with stress fractures. Dr. Vasquez told her assistant, a young medic named Thompson, "The training regimen is pushing these kids beyond human limits." Thompson nodded as he prepared medical supplies. "Commander Chen says they need to be ready for anything. After what happened with the Kreks, nobody wants to be caught unprepared again." "I understand the necessity," Vasquez replied, "but I'm concerned about the psychological impact. These recruits aren't just learning to fight, they're learning to enjoy violence. That's not normal, even for humans." Zexhai focused his sensors more intently. Finally, a human who recognized the disturbing nature of their own species' combat evolution. "With respect, Doctor," Thompson said, "normal went out the window when we joined the galactic community. Every other species has natural weapons, armor, or special abilities. We have to compensate somehow." "Compensate, yes," Vasquez agreed, "but we're going beyond compensation. We're turning ourselves into something inhuman." She gestured to a medical chart displaying injury statistics. "Look at these numbers. The recruits are sustaining injuries that should be impossible given our safety protocols. They're pushing themselves so hard that their bodies are literally breaking down. And when I try to put them on medical leave, they beg to return to training." Zexhai cross-referenced the medical data with his observations. The numbers were staggering. Human soldiers were performing at levels that exceeded their biological specifications by enormous margins. They were literally reshaping themselves into more effective killing machines. "Doctor," Thompson said quietly, "can I ask you something? Do you think we're wrong to do this?" Vasquez paused in her work, considering the question carefully. "I think we're doing what we believe is necessary for survival, but I also think we're losing something essential about what it means to be human." She pulled up another file on her computer. "I've been tracking the psychological profiles of our soldiers over the past year. The changes are dramatic. Increased aggression, decreased empathy, elevated stress tolerance, and most disturbing of all, an increasing tendency to view violence as the first solution to any problem." Zexhai realized he was witnessing an internal debate about human evolution. Some humans were aware of what they were becoming and questioned whether it was worth the cost. "But look at the results," Thompson argued. "We stopped the Kreks when nobody else could. We're keeping the galaxy safe. At what cost?" Vasquez asked. "We're creating a generation of soldiers who think like predators. What happens when the external threats are gone? What happens to a species that has trained itself to see everything as an enemy?" The conversation was interrupted by an emergency alarm. Vasquez and Thompson immediately dropped their discussion and rushed to the medical bay's emergency section. Zexhai followed with his sensors, curious about what kind of training accident could trigger such a response. What he found was worse than any training accident. Group of off-duty soldiers had been involved in what humans called a bar fight, a recreational combat scenario that had gotten out of control. 3 humans lay on medical tables, seriously injured from what was supposed to be casual entertainment. But the disturbing part wasn't the injuries. The disturbing part was how the participants described the incident. "It was amazing," said one soldier, his arm in a stabilization field. "Johnson here threw the first punch and suddenly everyone was involved. Like a chain reaction of violence." Another soldier, sporting a significant head injury, was actually smiling. "Best fight I've had since basic training. You should have seen Martinez. He took on 5 guys at once and almost won." Dr. Vasquez worked silently, treating their injuries with professional efficiency, but Zexhai could see the concern in her eyes. These soldiers weren't ashamed of their behavior, they were proud of it. "Doctor," asked the soldier with the head injury, "how soon can I return to duty? There's another training exercise tomorrow and I don't want to miss it." "You have a concussion," Vasquez replied. "You need at least 3 days of rest." 3 days? The soldier looked genuinely distressed. "But the new combat scenarios are starting." "I can't miss those." Zexai noticed that the soldier was more upset about missing training than about his injuries. The humans had developed an addiction to violence that went beyond professional necessity. After treating the injured soldiers, Dr. Vasquez returned to her office. Zexai continued monitoring her as she updated her reports and made notes about the incident. Personal log, Dr. Elena Vasquez. She spoke into her recording device. The bar fight incident confirms my worst fears about the direction of human military development. We're not just training soldiers. We're creating a warrior culture that glorifies violence as entertainment. She paused, looking tired and concerned. I've been reviewing historical data about human warfare throughout our species' development. We've always been capable of violence, but we've also always had cultural mechanisms to control and channel it. Honor codes, rules of engagement, concepts of just war, these things kept our violent tendencies from consuming us. Zexai realized that Dr. Vasquez understood something that the military leadership seemed to ignore. Humans were removing their own psychological safeguards in the name of military effectiveness. But now, Vasquez continued, we're deliberately dismantling those safeguards. We're telling our soldiers that there are no rules, no limits, no boundaries except effectiveness. We're breeding out our compassion and breeding in our capacity for violence. She pulled up files showing psychological profiles of human soldiers from different time periods. The data is clear. Each generation of soldiers shows increased aggression, decreased empathy, and reduced capacity for nonviolent problem solving. We're literally evolving into a more dangerous species. Zexai felt a chill as he processed this information. The humans weren't just becoming better soldiers, they were becoming fundamentally different creatures. The most disturbing part, Vasquez said, is that it's working. Our soldiers are more effective than anything the galaxy has ever seen. They're winning battles that should be impossible, defeating enemies that should be invincible. From a military perspective, this evolution is a complete success. She stood and walked to her window, looking out at the training grounds where human soldiers continued their endless preparation for war. But from a human perspective, it's a tragedy. We're losing our souls in order to save our lives. And the worst part is that most people see this as a fair trade. Zexai realized that Dr. Vasquez had identified the central horror of human military evolution. They were consciously choosing to become monsters because monsters were more effective at keeping them alive. I've requested permission to conduct a study on the long-term psychological effects of our current training methods, Vasquez continued. The military command has denied the request 3 times. They don't want to know what we're becoming. They only care about what we can accomplish. She turned back to her computer and began typing. I'm going to submit the request again. Someone needs to document what we're doing to ourselves. Someone needs to bear witness to the cost of our survival. Zexai realized that Dr. Vasquez might be the only human on the base who truly understood the implications of their species' transformation. She saw clearly what the others refused to acknowledge, that humanity was paying for its military success with its fundamental nature. But what terrified Zexai most was the knowledge that her concerns would likely be ignored. The humans had found a path to survival that worked, and they would follow it regardless of the consequences. They were becoming the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and they were doing it intentionally. On the 5th day of his observation, Zexai witnessed something that changed his understanding of human warfare forever. The base received an emergency transmission from a Federation outpost under attack by unknown hostiles. What followed was a demonstration of human military capability that exceeded every nightmare scenario the Galactic Council had imagined. The emergency came at 0347 hours. Zexai was monitoring routine night training when alarms began sounding throughout the base. Within minutes, the entire facility transformed from a sleepy training ground into a hive of lethal activity. Commander Chen appeared in the command center, fully dressed and alert despite having been asleep minutes earlier. Zexai noted that humans seemed capable of instantly transitioning from rest to full combat readiness, another adaptation that defied normal biological limitations. Report, Chen ordered as she entered the command room. Federation Outpost Gamma 7 is under attack, reported the communications officer. Unknown hostiles, estimated force strength in the thousands. The outpost has approximately 200 personnel, mostly civilian researchers and support staff. Chen studied the tactical display showing the outpost's location. How long until Federation reinforcements arrive? Minimum 6 hours, came the reply. The nearest military assets are deployed in the Corvin system. They'll be dead in 6 hours, Chen said matter-of-factly. What do we have available for immediate deployment? Zexai watched as the humans calculated their response options. The outpost was 3 hours away at maximum speed. The attacking force was 10 times larger than anything the humans could field. Any rational military commander would write off the outpost as a lost cause. Chen was not rational. Prep Alpha Squadron for immediate deployment, she ordered. Full combat load, maximum acceleration. The operations officer looked uncertain. Ma'am, we're looking at 50 soldiers against thousands of hostiles. The tactical computer rates our success probability at less than 2%. Chen turned to look at him, and Zexai recorded the expression on her face. It wasn't anger or determination. It was something far more disturbing. It was anticipation. Lieutenant, Chen said quietly, what's the first rule of human combat? There are no rules, ma'am. Exactly. Prep the squadron. Within 30 minutes, 50 human soldiers were aboard a high-speed transport heading towards certain death. Zexai made the decision to follow them, repositioning his observation ship to monitor the coming battle. He told himself it was for scientific purposes, but truthfully, he had become fascinated by human behavior in impossible situations. The journey gave him time to study the soldiers' preparations. Most species use travel time before battle for meditation, prayer, or psychological preparation for possible death. Humans used it for weapon maintenance and tactical planning, but they also did something else. They made jokes. Hey, Rodriguez, called out Sergeant Martinez. Remember that time you said you wanted to see what a real challenge looked like? I was drunk, Rodriguez replied while checking his rifle. Drunk statements don't count as official requests. Too late, laughed another soldier. You asked for a challenge, and the universe delivered. Zexai checked his translation systems repeatedly. These humans were facing impossible odds, likely death and certain defeat. Yet they were exhibiting behaviors associated with enjoyment and relaxation. Commander Chen addressed the squadron over the intercom. Listen up, people. We have incomplete intelligence on the enemy force. They appear to be using energy weapons and coordinated assault tactics. The outpost defensive systems are down, and civilian evacuation is impossible. She paused, letting the information sink in. This is not a rescue mission. This is not a defensive action. This is a demonstration of human military capability. When we're done, the galaxy will understand exactly what happens when you threaten Federation citizens. The soldiers responded, with what humans called hua, a battle cry that seemed to serve no tactical purpose but clearly boosted their psychological readiness. Remember, Chen continued, we're not trying to win through superior numbers or firepower. We're going to win because we're willing to do things our enemies haven't even imagined. Zexai realized that Chen was preparing her soldiers not just for battle, but for atrocity. She was deliberately removing any ethical constraints that might limit their effectiveness. The transport arrived at the outpost to find it under siege by a species Zexai didn't recognize. The attackers were large, heavily armored creatures that moved in perfect formation. Their weapons were advanced, their tactics were sound, and their numerical advantage was overwhelming. Chen studied the tactical situation for exactly 30 seconds before issuing her orders. Alpha Team, establish overwatch positions on the ridge. Bravo Team, infiltrate from the north. Charlie Team, you're with me. We're going in the front door. Ma'am, asked Rodriguez, shouldn't we try to determine their capabilities before engaging? We'll learn their capabilities by fighting them, Chen replied. Deploy. What followed was unlike any military engagement Zexai had ever witnessed. The humans didn't try to match their enemies' strengths. They attacked their assumptions. The alien attackers had positioned themselves for a conventional siege, expecting the defenders to remain inside the outpost until reinforcements arrived. They had established defensive perimeters, supply lines, and command structures based on standard military doctrine. The humans ignored all of it. Alpha Team began by attacking the aliens' rear positions, not to destroy them, but to create confusion. While the aliens tried to figure out where these new enemies had come from, Bravo Team infiltrated their supply lines and began sabotaging equipment. But Chen's frontal assault was the most disturbing. Instead of trying to break through the alien lines, she led Charlie Team directly into the middle of the enemy formation. The aliens, expecting humans to behave like rational soldiers, were completely unprepared for what amounted to a suicide charge. Except it wasn't suicide. It was tactical insanity designed to create maximum chaos. Chen's team fought with a ferocity that defied description. They used their smaller size to move through spaces the aliens couldn't follow. They turned captured weapons against their former owners. They set fires, created explosions, and generally turned the organized siege into complete pandemonium. More importantly, they used psychological warfare on a scale HFY had never imagined. The humans began making sounds, terrifying vocalizations that seemed designed to trigger primal fear responses. They moved in patterns that suggested supernatural abilities. They appeared to survive injuries that should have been fatal and continued fighting after taking damage that would cripple most species. Within 2 hours, an organized military assault by thousands of well-equipped aliens had devolved into panicked retreat. The attackers weren't just defeated, they were terrified. They fled the system entirely, broadcasting warnings about human capabilities that bordered on the mythological. When the battle ended, HFY checked the casualty reports. 0 human deaths, 3 minor injuries, complete mission success, but the cost wasn't measured in casualties. The cost was measured in what the humans had become during the fight. HFY had recorded everything, and reviewing the footage was deeply disturbing. The humans hadn't just fought, they had transformed. Their movements became more fluid, their responses more violent, their tactics more ruthless. They had literally become different creatures during combat. Mission accomplished, Chen reported to Base Command. Outpost secured, civilians safe, hostile force eliminated. Casualties? Asked the reply. None worth mentioning, Chen replied. HFY realized that Chen wasn't lying. To her, the psychological and ethical costs weren't worth mentioning. Only physical casualties mattered. As the transport returned to base, HFY listened to the soldiers' post-battle conversation. They discussed the fight with the same casual tone they might use to describe a training exercise. Did you see the look on that alien's face when Martinez came at him with the improvised flamethrower? Asked one soldier. Pure terror, Martinez replied with satisfaction. I don't think his species has a word for what we did to them. That's the point, said Chen. We don't want them to have words for it. We want them to fear what they can't understand. HFY realized that the humans had developed something beyond military doctrine. They had created a system of warfare designed to break their enemy's will to fight, through methods that defied comprehension. They weren't just soldiers, they were deliberately crafting themselves into living nightmares. The 6th day brought HFY face to face with the true horror of human military evolution. During his monitoring of the base's classified communications, he discovered that the outpost rescue was not an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic campaign to reshape galactic warfare. Deep in the base's secure data networks, HFY found files that revealed the scope of human military planning. What he discovered made his previous observations seem like minor concerns in comparison. The humans were not simply adapting to galactic warfare. They were deliberately designing themselves to dominate it. Hidden in encrypted files marked Project Apex Predator, HFY found documentation of human military development that spanned decades into the future. The plans were comprehensive, terrifying, and already being implemented. Phase 1 had been the integration of human forces into Federation military structures. This allowed them to study every alien species' combat capabilities, psychological profiles, and tactical doctrines. The Krex invasion had provided the perfect opportunity to demonstrate human effectiveness while gathering data on galactic military responses. Phase 2 involved establishing human training facilities throughout Federation space. Each facility was designed to prepare human soldiers for combat against specific alien species. The base HFY was observing was just one of dozens already operational. Phase 3 was the systematic replacement of alien military leadership with human advisors and commanders. This was being accomplished through a combination of demonstrated effectiveness and political maneuvering within Federation command structures. But Phase 4 was what truly terrified HFY. Oscar 4 called for the optimization of human military capability through selective enhancement of aggressive traits and elimination of limiting ethical constraints. The humans weren't Just training soldiers, they were breeding them. Zex. High-accessed medical files showing genetic screening, programs for military recruitment. Humans with higher aggression levels, reduced empathy responses, and enhanced stress tolerance were prioritized for advanced training. Those with strong ethical constraints or pacifist tendencies were quietly transferred to non-combat roles. More disturbing still were the psychological conditioning programs. Human soldiers underwent systematic desensitization to violence, empathy reduction therapy, and what the files euphemistically called moral flexibility training. They were literally engineering out their own humanity. But the most chilling discovery was in a file marked contingency, planning, Federation dissolution. The humans had war plans for fighting every species in the Federation, detailed tactical analyses, psychological warfare strategies, and systematic approaches to defeating each alien race filled thousands of pages. The plans weren't defensive. They were designed for total conquest. Zexai realized that humanity's integration into the Federation wasn't about cooperation or mutual defense. It was about gathering intelligence for eventual domination. His discovery was interrupted by activity in the command center. A priority communication from Federation High Command had arrived, and Commander Chen was meeting with her senior staff to discuss its contents. Zexai focused his sensors on the briefing room, desperate to understand what new development was driving human military planning. "Gentlemen," Chen began, "we've received confirmation of what our intelligence services have suspected for months. Several Federation member species are planning coordinated action against human military expansion." The staff officers exchanged glances. Zexai noted their expressions, not surprise or concern, but anticipation. The Thraxian Empire, Kornak Collective, and Viridian Republic have formed what they're calling a Security Council to address the human problem, Chen continued. "Intelligence suggests they're planning military action to limit our capabilities." Colonel Martinez leaned forward in his chair. "Are we talking about direct confrontation?" "Eventually," Chen replied. "But first they'll try political solutions, restricted access to Federation resources, limits on human military deployment, forced disarmament protocols." "And if we refuse?" asked another officer. Chen's smile was predatory. "Then they'll discover why refusing to cooperate with humans was the worst mistake in galactic history." I realized he was witnessing the planning stages of what could become the largest military conflict in galactic history. The humans weren't just preparing to defend themselves, they were preparing to eliminate any species that threatened their expansion. "Phase 5 is now authorized," Chen announced. "Begin full implementation of the Omega Protocol." Zexai accessed his databases frantically, searching for any reference to this Omega Protocol. What he found in the classified files made his worst fears seem optimistic. The Omega Protocol was humanity's plan for total galactic dominance. It involved the systematic conquest of every Federation world, the subjugation of all alien species, and the establishment of human hegemony throughout known space. The protocol included detailed plans for occupation governments, resource extraction, and the management of alien populations under human control. But most terrifying was the timeline. The humans expected to complete galactic conquest within 20 years. "Sir?" asked one of the staff officers. "What about civilian casualties? The Federation worlds have billions of non-combatant aliens." Chen looked at him with something approaching disappointment. "Colonel, what's the first rule of human combat?" "There are no rules, ma'am." "Exactly. Civilian casualties are a concern for species that can afford to show mercy. We cannot." Zexai realized that the humans had moved beyond military efficiency into something approaching genocide planning. They were preparing to eliminate entire species that couldn't be effectively controlled. The briefing continued with discussions of resource allocation, troop deployment, and target prioritization. Each Federation world was evaluated based on strategic value, defensive capabilities, and expected resistance levels. Zexai noted that his own homeworld was classified as priority target, high value, moderate resistance. The humans planned to conquer his people within the first year of the campaign. As the briefing concluded, Chen made one final announcement that chilled Zexai to his core. "Gentlemen, some of you may have ethical concerns about what we're planning. That's natural. We were raised to believe in cooperation and peaceful coexistence. But we've learned something important during our time in the Federation. She gestured to a tactical display showing the positions of various alien fleets. Every other species in this galaxy sees us as inferior. They tolerate us because we're useful, but they would eliminate us without hesitation if they believed we posed a real threat. The Krex invasion taught us that we can't rely on alien protection for human survival. We must take responsibility for our own security, even if that means taking control of galactic civilization. Zexhai realized that the humans had convinced themselves that conquest was self-defense. They genuinely believed that subjugating the galaxy was necessary for human survival. This isn't about power or domination, Chen continued. This is about ensuring that humanity never again faces extinction because we trusted aliens to protect us. The staff officers nodded in agreement. They had accepted the logic that made genocide seem like self-preservation. As the meeting ended and the officers dispersed to begin implementation of the Omega Protocol, Zexhai faced a terrible realization. His mission to observe human combat capabilities had revealed something far worse than dangerous soldiers. He had discovered a species that was systematically transforming itself into something designed to conquer the galaxy. Worse still, they were doing it with the sincere belief that they had no choice. The humans weren't becoming monsters by accident. They were becoming monsters because they believed it was the only way to survive, and based on what Zexhai had observed, they were probably right. On the 7th and final day of his observation mission, Zexhai prepared his report for the Galactic Council, while grappling with a horrifying realization. His own presence at the human base had been detected, monitored and manipulated from the very beginning. He discovered this during what he thought was routine data compilation. While reviewing his surveillance recordings, Zexhai noticed subtle inconsistencies in the human behavior patterns. Certain conversations seemed deliberately staged for his benefit. Training exercises appeared designed to showcase specific capabilities. Even the classified files he had accessed showed signs of careful curation. The humans had known he was watching them. Everything he had observed had been a carefully orchestrated performance. His revelation was confirmed when his ship's communication system activated without his input. Commander Chen's face appeared on his display, looking directly at him with that predatory smile he had learned to fear. "Good morning, Observer Zexhai," Chen said calmly. "I trust your week with us has been educational." Zexhai's tentacles coiled in shock. "How did you detect your ship? Track your surveillance? Access your communications?" Chen interrupted. "We've been monitoring your observation mission since you arrived. In fact, we've been tracking Galactic Council intelligence operations for months." The display shifted to show detailed schematics of Zexhai's own ship, including technical specifications that should have been classified at the highest levels. The humans hadn't just detected him, they had completely compromised his mission. "You see," Chen continued, "we knew the Council would send observers eventually. Your species' psychology is quite predictable. When faced with a superior force, you gather intelligence before deciding whether to negotiate or fight." Zexhai realized that his entire mission had been anticipated and planned for. The humans had shown him exactly what they wanted him to see. Nothing more and nothing less. "The question now," Chen said, "is what you're going to tell the Council when you return." Zexhai found his voice. "I will report the truth. That humanity represents an existential threat to galactic civilization." Chen nodded approvingly. "Good. That's exactly what we want you to say." The casual way she admitted to wanting to be perceived as a threat sent chills through Zexhai's nervous system. "You want the Council to fear you?" "Fear as a tool," Chen explained. "Right now the Council sees us as useful subordinates. They tolerate our methods because we are effective against external threats. But tolerance isn't respect, and it certainly isn't security." She gestured to something off-screen, and the display shifted to show real-time footage of Federation military bases throughout the galaxy. Human soldiers were visible at every installation, integrated into alien command structures and training programs. "We've spent 3 years embedding ourselves into Federation military infrastructure," Chen continued. "Human advisors, trainers, and specialists are now essential to galactic defense. Removing us would cripple the Federation's military capability." Zexhai realized the scope of human infiltration was far beyond what anyone had suspected. They hadn't just joined the Federation, they had made themselves indispensable to it. "But infiltration only provides security as long as we remain subordinate," Chen said. Eventually, some species will decide that human capabilities represent a threat to be eliminated rather than a resource to be exploited. The display showed intelligence reports from various Federation worlds. Several alien governments were indeed discussing the human problem and potential solutions ranging from restrictive treaties to preemptive military action. Your report will accelerate that process, Chen explained. When the Council realizes the true extent of human military capability, they'll be forced to choose between acceptance and confrontation. HFY began to understand the horrifying genius of the human strategy. You're forcing them to attack you first. Exactly. When the Federation moves against humanity, we'll have moral justification for our response. We'll be defending ourselves against alien aggression rather than launching an unprovoked conquest. Chen's expression became almost sympathetic. We don't enjoy what we've become, Observer. But we've learned that in a galaxy filled with species that could exterminate us, survival requires being the most dangerous predator in the ecosystem. She pulled up historical data showing human development since joining the Federation. 3 years ago, we were a minor species grateful for Federation protection. The Krex invasion taught us that protection based on alien goodwill is worthless. We can only guarantee human survival by ensuring that threatening us becomes too costly for anyone to attempt. HFY saw the tragic logic of human evolution. They had concluded that becoming monsters was preferable to becoming victims. What happens to species that surrender immediately? HFY asked, thinking of his own people. They'll be incorporated into human civilization as protected populations, Chen replied. We have no interest in genocide for its own sake. We simply need to ensure that no alien species ever again has the capability to threaten human existence. The euphemistic language couldn't hide the reality of what she was describing. Humanity planned to reduce every other species to the status of pets or livestock. And species that resist? Chen's expression hardened. We'll learn why resistance is futile. She activated another display showing human military assets hidden throughout Federation space. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, weapon systems that defied current technological understanding. How long have you been planning this? HFY asked. Since the day we realized that joining the Federation meant accepting permanent subordination to species that saw us as expendable, Chen replied. We decided that if we couldn't be equal partners, we would become undisputed masters. HFY realized that his observation mission had been the final piece of the human plan. His report would trigger the very conflict that would justify human conquest of the galaxy. You're going to destroy everything, he whispered. We're going to save everything, Chen corrected. Under human leadership, the galaxy will experience unprecedented peace and prosperity. There will be no more wars between species, no more conflicts over resources, no more threats to galactic civilization. Because there will only be one species left in control. Because there will be one species capable of maintaining order, Chen agreed. Humanity didn't choose this role, Observer. It was forced upon us by the realities of galactic politics. She leaned forward, and HFY saw something unexpected in her eyes, genuine regret mixed with absolute determination. When you deliver your report, Chen said, remember that everything that follows could have been avoided. The Council will have the opportunity to accept human leadership peacefully. Any violence that occurs will be the result of their choice to resist rather than adapt. The communication ended, leaving HFY alone with the weight of terrible knowledge. His report would doom the galaxy to conquest or destruction, but failing to report would leave the Council unprepared for what was coming. As he prepared his ship for departure, HFY realized that humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had become a species so thoroughly adapted to warfare that peace was no longer possible. They would either rule the galaxy or destroy it in the attempt, and based on everything he had observed, they had the capability to succeed. His final log entry reflected the tragedy of his situation. Observer's note. I was sent to study human combat capabilities and assess their threat level to galactic civilization. Mission accomplished. Threat level absolute. Recommendation. Pray to whatever gods you believe in because humanity is coming, and they've transformed themselves into something that cannot be stopped. HFY set course for home, knowing that his report would be the catalyst for the greatest war in galactic history. The humans had planned it perfectly. They would be seen as responding to alien aggression rather than initiating conquest. By the time the galaxy realized what was happening, it would be far too late to stop it. Humanity had spent 3 years studying their enemies and preparing for total war. Their opponents were about to learn what it meant to face a species that had deliberately bred out mercy, honor, and every limitation that might prevent them from achieving absolute victory. The age of human dominance was about to begin, and HFY carried the message that would herald its arrival.